Thinking about the upcoming test and some of your discussion responses, I've decided that a short video on Alexander the Great might prove useful. In the last video, we observed that Greek ways of life persisted in the Eastern Mediterranean and the Near East for centuries after Alexander the Great, even after Hellenistic kingdoms that succeeded him had been absorbed by the Roman Empire. Here is the Hellenistic city of Alexandria on the Oxus, otherwise known as Ai-Khanoum, on the very edge of Alexander's conquests in modern-day Afghanistan. This distant outpost had all of the trappings of a Greek city: an agora, a gymnasium, a theater. In its ruins, archaeologists discovered a burial inscription repeating a saying from the shrine of Delphi in Greece. As a child, be orderly. As a youth, be self-controlled. As an adult, be just. As an old man, be of good counsel. When dying, be without sorrow. This distant outpost survived for about a century and a half, but many of the other Hellenistic cities around the Mediterranean and the Near East endured for nearly 1,000 years. How did this happen? As you will recall, the growth of large empires like the Neo-Assyrians and the Persians during the Iron Age threatened the survival of smaller kingdoms and cultures. We saw how the Jews looked to their scriptures. Through their development of a strict monotheism that portrayed their history as the working out of a covenant with a transcendent God, they adapted and survived. They wrote a book. In the 5th century, the Greeks also believed their survival was threatened by a mighty empire. The Persian Empire had swallowed Greek colonies in Anatolia, modern Turkey, and was on the doorstep of the center of the Greek world. The unruly and squabbling polis seemed doomed, but they managed to do more than survive. The Greeks never clamored for a common ruler, a Saul, but like the Jews, they developed cultural institutions that allowed the unruly and squabbling polis to create a cultural empire more extensive and enduring than that of the Persians. Writing shortly after the first conflicts between the Greeks and the Persians, the Greek writer Herodotus outlined what scholars have come to describe as Pan-Hellenism. The Greeks believed that a shared ancestry, a shared language, shared religious institutions, and shared ways of life, for example the polis and colonization, made them distinct from barbarians such as the Persians. Because of their culture, the Hellenes, as the Greeks described themselves, were not so weakened by luxury that they would submit to a king of kings. The Athenians and Spartans used Pan-Hellenism to rally resistance to the Persians. The struggle against the barbarians did not end with the Athenian victory over the Persian great king Xerxes at Salamis in 480 BCE. While the Persians did not mount another full-scale invasion, they continued to intervene in Greek affairs, supporting one set of Greeks against another for more than a century and a half. Eventually, Greeks such as Isocrates called for a revival of Pan-Hellenism to unify the Hellenes and put an end to Persian meddling. Ironically, the man who would lead the Pan-Hellenic crusade against the Persians was only half Hellene, from a kingdom that spoke incomprehensible Greek and had outlandish customs, including a monarchy rather than polis. Nevertheless, Alexander led an astonishingly successful campaign against the Persians. When Alexander destroyed the Persian capital of Persepolis in 330 BCE, he declared that the Persian destruction of Athens in 480 BCE had been avenged. Success, however, presented other problems that we have encountered before with empires. How do you incorporate former enemies into your new empire? Like the Neo-Assyrians, Alexander was not above terror. Cities that resisted too forcefully were leveled. Rebellious subjects might be massacred. Men and women sold into slavery. However, the widespread pursuit of such policies was not practical in the long run. A raiding bandit might smash and grab every few years, but transforming yourself into a stationary bandit who collected taxes might be preferable, if the natives could be pacified. Alexander clearly hoped to pacify Persia. He hoped to unite the Greek and Persian ruling classes. Described as a policy of fusion, Alexander planned to include Persians in his army and encouraged marriage between his officers and Persian noblewomen. He also adopted components of Persian dress and tried to encourage the Persian ritual of proskynesis among his Greek and Macedonian soldiers. Proskynesis or obeisance was the Persian practice of affirming social hierarchy by means of gestures, ranging from a kiss between social equals to full prostration before the great king. When you read of the resistance to proskynesis in the primary source selection from the historian Arrian's Anabasis, ask yourself a couple of questions. First, according to Arrian, why did the Greeks object? Then think about the idea of Panhellenism. How would fusion relate to the ideas of Panhellenism? No, I'm not going to answer this question for you. Working out an answer for yourself will make the story stick in your mind. Alexander was compelled to moderate his policy of fusion, but it was only his untimely death that put an end to his vision of fusion. And yet, a different kind of fusion did occur after Alexander's death. Rather than fusion, as Alexander saw it, the empire that Alexander conquered was Hellenized. Both existing cities as well as newly founded cities became Greek polis. In places as distant as present-day Afghanistan, Alexandria on the Oxus, cities were established with all of the institutions of a Greek city: an agora, monumental temples, a gymnasium, and theaters. However, this period is called Hellenistic or Greek-like for a reason. Outwardly, the institutions of the Hellenistic kingdoms seem like those of classical Greece, but they differed in fundamental ways. Panhellenism imagined a common ancestry for citizens of the polis, but many of the inhabitants of these Hellenistic polis were not descendants of Greek colonists, but Hellenized elites, like the Jews described in the selection from the books of Maccabees. Likewise, Hellenistic religion was very different from that of the classical period. In the Hellenistic kingdoms, the old gods who had defended the Hellenes against the barbarians seemed less useful. In the cosmopolis, where your fellow citizen might be an Egyptian, Syrian, or Jewish, Greeks began to experiment with foreign gods, and among the native elites in Egypt and the Near East, Hellenized forms of their old gods developed. Furthermore, the polis continued, but the ideas that all citizens of a polis were equal, so that they might rule and be ruled in turn, was undermined by the increased wealth of the Hellenistic kingdom and the idea of monarchy. In all aspects of life, the emphasis upon public life gave way to the pursuit of private life. It was still a Greek world, but not a classical Greek world.